morning, everyone. My name is Joe Castelluccio. I'm a partner at Mayer Brown in New York. I co-lead our firm's financial services M&A practice, as well as our global fintech and digital assets groups. And it's an absolute privilege for me to be here speaking with our two panelists this morning. Both have had long and distinguished careers in the private sector as well as in public service, so I'll just briefly introduce both of them. Christy Goldsmith Romero served as CFTC Commissioner from 2022 to 2025 and has recently joined the faculty at Georgetown Law School. Summer Mersinger also served as CFTC Commissioner from 22 to 25 and is now the CEO of the Blockchain Association. Welcome to both of you, and a thousand thank yous for joining us this morning.
Happy to be here. And you know what's exciting is this is the first time Christy and I get to speak without giving a standard disclaimer.
This is awesome. And by the way, on that time frame, we started on the same day and we left on the same day. And every day in between, pretty much we talked. So I hope you get to see a little bit of that today.
Yeah, and part of my job as moderator is to ask a few questions and then to get out of the way and let you enjoy the conversation. So just as a lead-in, over the past several years, the CFTC has explored blockchain and tokenization through efforts such as its Global Markets Advisory Committee and Digital Asset Markets Subcommittee. Through that, the CFTC has increasingly found itself at the heart of the debate about how digital assets should be regulated. So my first question for both of you is, reflecting on your time at the CFTC, what was your experience like in terms of how the CFTC's role evolved and how the attention to digital assets expanded during that time?
Yeah, sure. Also the Technology Advisory Committee, which I sponsored, which did a lot in digital assets. So first of all, thank you, GBBC. Thank you, Sandra. It's always great to work with GBBC. So this is what I'll say about reflecting back. It was exciting and it was hard. So I was already drawn to come because the CFTC was open to responsible innovation, was actually regulating the trading of digital assets. So it was super exciting to break new ground. It's also very hard to break new ground. And oftentimes we were alone. And so we, when you're actually regulating the trading of digital assets, there's just a lot of day-to-day issues that come up and a lot of decisions that come up. And they're landmark decisions. And so we would just have to put our heads together and we say, how do we look at this new thing? This hasn't happened before. What can we do under our authority? We expanded digital asset trading, which was exciting. We leaned in hard to try to take a fresh look at regulation in looking at our authority, what we could do, how we could innovate. And for me, I was sort of looking at how do we make sure there's customer protections? How do we make sure we're still doing anti-money laundering? And how do we make sure we don't do something that breaks the market for traditional players? So super exciting, very hard, but without the CFTC's work, there would have been no regulated trading of digital assets.
Yeah, and I don't know if people realize that, you know, the highest volume of trading in the digital asset space in the United States was CME's futures. You know, they were breaking records every day with their Bitcoin futures products, Ether futures products. So we were kind of on the forefront of regulating. What I found challenging is, you know, with the spot market, when we weren't dealing with a futures product, when we were looking at just the buying and selling in the spot market, we only had fraud and anti-fraud and anti-manipulation enforcement authority. So we were going in after something had already occurred, sometimes it was just fraud, other times it was more complicated, and we were trying to apply our rules and the Commodity Exchange Act to these new and novel markets and the technology, and it didn't fit quite right. And so I struggled a little bit on the enforcement side because there were times that I felt we were really stretching the limits of the statute and our rules to try to get at activity that we maybe just didn't have the jurisdiction to get at yet. So that to me was a struggle. And you know, I know Christy and I talked a lot about, you know, DeFi was one of the areas where I really struggled and how our regulations and how our statute could apply to DeFi. And I know we had some long conversations about how should DeFi be treated by our enforcement team, how should DAOs be treated as far as liability. So it was definitely, there were a lot of robust conversations and a lot to think about all the time.
Yeah, DeFi is tough. I mean, this was, when we look at those cases, I remember we were both sort of saying, what do we do with this? And it was a really tough situation where I didn't want to let something completely go unchecked that could be breaking the law, but at the same time, I knew that we didn't have the right framework in place for DeFi, and we still don't at the CFTC. So that's why I used the Technology Advisory Committee to put a big report out on DeFi, which basically talks about engaging and really with industry and also just trying to understand it more.
The other thing I had a hard time with, I really do love the staff at the CFTC. I loved our enforcement team, and I always had a hard time disagreeing with them because they were such good people. And I remember on the UkiDAO case, they used a novel theory for liability of the DAO, and they won that in California. And everyone was very excited for them. And I wanted to be excited for them, but at the same time, I'm like, but you shouldn't have done that. And so it was kind of a challenge to go up against staff sometimes when you respect them and you know how hard they work, but at the same time, philosophically, we had a different approach.
So it sounds like over 3 years on an almost daily basis, you were breaking new ground, bridging gaps that had never been bridged before, and probably learning a lot as you went. So with that in mind, very hard question to answer. What are some lessons that you learned or that you maybe want to highlight, and how those can be translated as we look forward into how other regulators are going to continue to struggle with these questions?
You want me to go to first this time?
Yeah.
So I think one of the most important lessons that I learned was just the need for education. I never wanted to assume I understood the technology better than those in the industry. Having those ongoing conversations with players in the market, learning how the technology operated. One of the things early on I realized is I'd never seen a crypto trade. And so, one of the things I had somebody do when they came in to visit, I said, can you just trade some crypto and show me how it's done? As government officials, we weren't allowed to own crypto. So there was a lot of education, a lot of learning, and I think just having that engagement with industry was so important and something that I learned very quickly. We just had to constantly be learning and talking to industry.
Yeah, so engagement for sure. I mean, I think, when you're dealing with technology, as a regulator, you don't want to make decisions where you don't understand how that technology is evolving and emerging. I would say 2 big lessons for me on top of engaging, because I want to echo what Summer said. The first is digital assets is not one thing, it's not a monolith. It's so varied and so different. And so different people would come in to meet with me, and so I think for the industry going forward, for regulators going forward, it's really important that you come in and you differentiate yourself. We'll do homework on you, but you have to come in and explain what you're about, how you're different, what you care about, because there's just so much variance in this field. The industry, there is not one main industry. And so it's really important to understand the differences. Same lesson, but flip it around to regulators and policymakers. I don't think it's helpful to use political labels. I really don't. I'm a Democrat. I support responsible innovation. I sponsored the Technology Advisory Committee. I regulated the trading of digital assets. I don't think it's helpful to make this tribal, and I think it cuts against the industry and what you're trying to do in terms of scaling and growing. I think it's more important to find common ground, right? Like to say, like in my mind, you think about digital assets, it arose out of Occupy Wall Street and a mistrust of Wall Street. Okay, all right, you've got my attention. That's when I became interested, right? And now we're talking about regular people want to trade it, sometimes for the first time that they've ever been in a market. You've also got my attention. So if they're going to be trading, I want it to be regulated. I want to be able to put in customer protections. I want to be able to put in AML. So I think it's about, we need to step away from, I'll say we, but I tried never to do this, step away from any kind of political labels. There are a lot of people, regardless of party affiliation, who support responsible innovation and who want to move in that direction. And to the extent some of this tribalism can drop, I think it's going to be a lot better.
Hard to argue with that. So, in the past several months, we've seen some pretty rapid change in the way that at least some federal regulators have looked at digital assets and blockchain technology. And we're all watching the significant legislation that's making its way through Congress. And without commenting on the specifics or specific parts of that, what do you see as some of the major challenges for implementing new frameworks for regulating these digital assets, given, as you said, Christy, that it's not one thing?
Yeah, do you want me to go first? Okay, so first of all, I think I can speak for both of us. We both support there to be legislation, as I said in my earlier answer. So I think there's a number of challenges, some of which can be overcome, but it's going to take some work. I think the major challenge is the idea that there might be one commissioner at the CFTC, which is not good. I think, legal experts will say they can do that, but it's not a good situation. And you've got companies who will be investing a lot of money into infrastructure and other things, and they want surety and certainty down the line that things are not going to be reversed in a couple of years. The explosion of retail interest and the increase in retail customers is not something that the CFTC has traditionally dealt with, because retail didn't usually go into oil futures, wheat futures, that kind of thing. So I've always advocated in new legislation that there be a definition of retail customer and then some rulemaking that the CFTC would do around that. This is not to stop someone from trading in digital assets, but it's to make sure they know their rights and risks and things like bankruptcy protections and things like that. Then there's like a series of things I think will be a challenge. Provisional registration, to the extent that's in there, will be a challenge, not that one that can't be overcome, but the US doesn't do a lot of sandbox stuff, and so that's really kind of what you're stepping into. You really need clear language. I think that there's the potential for regulatory arbitrage, so I think this idea of when you have multiple agencies trying to figure out those clean lines and coordinating and all of that. So that's a lot. And then I think DeFi is going to just continue to be a challenge, particularly as it evolves in very different ways that can be hard to differentiate what's centralized or decentralized.
Yeah, definitions are definitely one of the hardest parts about the legislation, I think, for Congress, getting those definitions right. And leaving them, having them specific enough where everybody knows what you're talking about, but also leaving them flexible enough so that we're not locking in innovation or locking in the technology. And I think on the implementation side, whether it's the CFTC or the SEC, making sure that whatever implementing rules are put in place are flexible and they don't lock in the technology, that they recognize that this is going to be a changing landscape and we have to stay up on, we have to be prepared to pivot quickly. That's, I'd say, the reason I think everybody has been very interested in having the CFTC as a primary regulator of the spot market, because we were a principles-based regulator that provided a lot of flexibility and gave the markets the ability to kind of change as the customers and consumers change. So making sure that they stay flexible, and then timing. Dodd-Frank, we were still working on finishing up some Dodd-Frank rulemaking when we started, and it takes a long time to do regulations. I don't want anyone to think that is the government being slow. It's important that you get them right. It's important that you have the proper public comment period. It's important that you take those comments and put them into the drafts. And so this is an area where you don't want to rush, because you can easily get it wrong if you rush, and it's really hard to go back and fix it. So it's going to take time. It's going to feel very slow. And so, when we get to that point, I would just say, you got to be patient with the regulators, because I do think they're going to move as fast as they can. It's just going to be a slow process.
The Dodd-Frank example is interesting because that was actually passed after just a couple of weeks of hearings, really, really fast. And then the residual effect of that, as you said, is years and years and decades of kind of figuring out what it all meant. Stepping just briefly back into your roles as regulators for a second, again, not speaking for the agency, but if you were still a regulator, what would you say to others in terms of how to best approach the space? Challenges and this is sort of back to the lessons learned question, but more on the how do we go forward, deal with it differently?
Yeah, I think being open and willing to learn. I do think the previous 4 years, the CFTC was very good about hearing from innovators, having people come in, explain what they're doing, recognizing when something didn't really fall in our space. But for other regulators, I think there was a bit of a kind of closed door mentality, and I think that is dangerous because you want to know what's going on. You want to know what these business models are and what's available to customers and to investors. And so I would definitely say, keep the door open, meet with people, talk with people, learn about their businesses, and where you can provide clarity, do it. Where you could say, maybe we are not going to regulate here, and that's fine, but put that out publicly. Be clear, provide the clarity, be transparent. I think those are critical to any new space when you're thinking about regulation.
Okay, I'm going to raise something that I've raised for years, including at Consensus a couple years ago, which is move from anonymity, which attracts illicit finance, to financial privacy. If you can do that, you get TradFi. TradFi is highly regulated in this area. And this is an area where I think, after talking with a lot of people in this area, you can use technology to do that. So figure out this way to increase anti-money laundering, anti-terrorist financing in a way that you'll be able to get investments in.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, my last question, I said the one I was going to keep in reserve if we needed it with a minute or so left. So let's skip ahead to June 12th, 2026, a year from now, and look back on the last 12 months in the digital asset sector. 2 questions. What is one thing we will have definitely seen? And what is one surprising thing you think we might see?
Definitely stablecoin legislation that's been passed, I would say. Surprisingly, more bipartisan support for digital assets.
That's the thing you definitely think we'll see.
Which one? Definitely on the stablecoin.
Okay. And the surprising thing is bipartisan support?
More bipartisan support.
Hopefully not too surprising.
Yeah, I agree on the stablecoin. I think that gets across the finish line. I think surprising will be the fact that blockchain technology is somehow integrated in everybody's life where you least expect it.
Well, that just about finishes our time. So I want to thank our panelists again. Summer, Christy, thank you so much for joining us this morning.